The police were already at the gate. This is my story of betrayal, awakening, and justice. If you're watching this, subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The candle flames wavered as I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror of my dining room. 90 years old today, the wrinkles on my face told stories of joy, grief, and everything in between. The Victorian house around me, once filled with laughter, now echoed with silence. "Make a wish, Margaret," Gloria said, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners as she held up the small cake with a single candle. Gloria wasn't family, but my nurse of 3 years had become the closest thing to it. I closed my eyes, blew out the candle, and we both pretended this was exactly how I wanted to celebrate my 90th birthday. My phone buzzed. Richard, my only son. I answered with perhaps too much eagerness. "Mom, I'm so sorry." His voice carried that familiar tension. "There's an emergency at work. I can't make it today." "Of course," I replied, my professor's voice betraying nothing of the disappointment crushing my chest. "Work comes first. I'll visit soon, I promise." Promises. Richard had been making them since he was a boy trying to please his father. Robert had been brilliant in business, but merciless in his expectations. I remembered our son at 12, tears streaming down his face after bringing home a B+ in mathematics. "Wilsons don't settle for average," Robert had said, not looking up from his newspaper. I had always been the buffer between them, the translator of their different languages. After Robert died 5 years ago, I thought Richard and I might finally connect without that shadow between us. Instead, the distance grew. "Gloria made a lovely cake," I said into the phone, keeping my tone light. "Perhaps you can have a slice when you visit." "Sure, Mom. I have to go." The call ended, and Gloria squeezed my shoulder. We ate cake in silence, and I refused to acknowledge the pity in her eyes. The doorbell rang at 10:37 p.m., startling me from my book. Gloria had left hours ago. Through the peephole, I saw Richard, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I'm sorry I missed your birthday," he said, stepping inside. He handed me a small gift bag, a scarf, the same shade of blue as one he'd given me 2 years prior. "You didn't have to," I said, noticing the folder tucked under his arm. "Actually," he cleared his throat, "I brought some papers that need your signature. Just some bank documents to help organize your finances better." "At this hour? I've been meaning to help you get your affairs in order," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You're not getting any younger, Mom." Something in his voice made me pause. His shoulders relaxed a fraction more. "There," he smiled, gathering the papers. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" As he left, I stood in the doorway watching his retreating figure, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with the night air. For the first time in decades, I wondered if I truly knew my son at all. The silver fish platter was missing. I noticed it while dusting the china cabinet, the empty space where the antique serving dish had resided for 30 years. "Gloria," I called out, "have you seen the silver fish platter?" She appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a towel. "The one with the engraved handles? I haven't seen it in weeks." A week later, my mother's pearl earrings vanished from my jewelry box, then a crystal decanter from the study. Small items, easily overlooked. Richard began visiting twice weekly, always with documents that needed my signature. His timing was impeccable, arriving just after I'd taken my evening medication or when my wrist was particularly painful from the fall I'd taken in March. "These investment transfers will help secure your future," he explained, sliding another paper across the kitchen table while I struggled to focus through the haze of pain medication. "The market is volatile, and we need to protect your assets. Shouldn't I have my accountant review these?" I asked. Richard's smile tightened. "Mom, I'm just trying to help. Don't you trust me?" Trust. The word hung between us like a challenge. I thought of the boy who'd hidden his report cards, the teenager who'd borrowed money from my purse, the young man who'd called at midnight needing bail after a DUI. I'd always made excuses for him. Robert was too hard on him. He was finding himself. Everyone makes mistakes. "Of course I trust you," I lied, signing where he indicated. When Gloria entered with tea, Richard snapped the folder shut. "Thank you, Gloria, but we're fine." "Actually," Gloria said with unmistakable firmness, "it's time for Margaret's medication." Richard stood abruptly. "I should go. I'll bring the final documents next week." After he left, Gloria sat across from me. "Margaret, I'm concerned. He never lets me in the room when you're discussing these papers." I rubbed my temples. He says he's organizing my finances. Then why is he always here when you're tired or medicated? And have you noticed things disappearing? The direct question made my stomach clench. Admitting my suspicions would make them real. I'm not confused, if that's what you're asking, I said. I know where I put things. I never suggested you were, Gloria replied. But Richard did, didn't he? My silence was answer enough. Later, while hanging Richard's forgotten coat, a slip of paper fell from the pocket, a receipt from Golden Opportunity Pawn Shop, dated yesterday. The itemized list included sterling silver serving platter and pearl earrings, vintage. I stared at the evidence in my trembling hand. The betrayal felt physical, like a blade between my ribs. The next time Richard arrived with his folder, I smiled and took my pills in front of him, but secretly slipped them under my tongue. As he laid out another document, I asked innocently, "Did you find your coat? You left it last time." His eyes flicked to mine, then away. "Yes, thanks. I hung it in the closet," I continued, watching him carefully. "Nothing in the pockets, I hope." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "No, nothing important." Another lie. As I signed where he pointed, a new resolve crystallized within me. I'd spent decades making excuses for my son, but no more. Whatever game Richard was playing, I needed to understand the rules, and fast. Heavy knocking jolted me awake. Outside my window, the morning light cast long shadows across the garden. The clock read 7:14 a.m. "Coming," I called, wrapping my robe around me. Gloria wasn't due until 9. Two men stood on my porch. The taller one wore an expensive suit that strained across his broad shoulders. The shorter man hung back, his eyes darting past me to scan the entryway. "Mrs. Wilson?" The tall one smiled without warmth. "I'm Vincent. Is Richard home?" I clutched my collar tighter. "My son doesn't live here." "Really? His car's been here a lot lately." Vincent's tone was conversational, but his eyes were calculating. "We have some business to discuss with him." "What kind of business?" "The kind where he owes us money." Vincent stepped closer. "A significant amount." I felt a flutter of fear but steadied myself. "I haven't seen Richard since Tuesday." "When you do, tell him Vincent stopped by. Tell him our patience has limits." As they turned to leave, Vincent paused. "Nice house. Victorian, right? These old places are worth a fortune these days." The threat hung in the air as they drove away. I found Gloria in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed. She startled when I entered. "Gloria, what's wrong?" "Nothing," she said too quickly, wiping her eyes. "Just allergies. Those men came to the door before I did, didn't they?" Her shoulders slumped. "They asked if Richard was here. When I said no, the big one said I should encourage him to settle his debts." I took her hand. "Did they threaten you?" "Not explicitly." Gloria hesitated. "Margaret, I recognized one of them. The shorter man. He was involved in a fraud scheme at the bank where I worked before becoming a nurse." I sank into a chair. "What kind of trouble is Richard in?" "From what I overheard, gambling debts. Horse racing, underground poker." "Of course. Richard's financial more desperate." "There's something else," Gloria said. "I found this when I was changing the sheets in the guest room." She handed me a crumpled notebook page with my signature practiced dozens of times in Richard's handwriting. Below was a crude sketch of my house with numbers scribbled beside it. 1.2 pwanners. The sickening reality crystallized. Richard wasn't just taking small valuables. He was after everything. "He's been coming at strategic times," I said slowly. "When my wrist is hurting or right after I've taken medication. Making you sign documents without properly reading them," Gloria finished. "I need to see what I've signed." My voice sounded stronger than I felt. "And I need to understand exactly what he's planning." Gloria squeezed my hand. "Margaret, we need to be careful. These aren't just pushy creditors. These are dangerous people." I thought of Vincent's dead-eyed smile, of the practiced signatures, of my precious possessions disappearing one by one. A lifetime of protecting Richard, making excuses for him, crashed down around me. "I've been careful my whole life, Gloria." I stood, straightening my spine, and look where it's gotten me. That afternoon, I called my bank and discovered 3 accounts had been emptied. When I mentioned Richard's name, the manager grew quiet, then said, "Mrs. Wilson, perhaps you should come in. There are some transactions we need to discuss." As I hung up, the doorbell rang. Richard stood there smiling, a young woman beside him. "Mom, I want you to meet Vanessa, my girlfriend." She flashed perfect teeth. "I've heard so much about you, Mrs. Wilson." Behind their smiles, I sensed vultures circling, waiting for me to fall. Ex-banking industry, you said? I placed a cup of tea before Gloria in my study, now converted to our investigation headquarters. A week had passed since Vincent's visit. 25 years as assistant branch manager. Gloria tapped the documents spread across my desk. These aren't standard bank forms. See how the fine print differs from page to page? Some sections have been modified. I squinted through my reading glasses. What does that mean? It means Richard is combining legitimate documents with altered ones. She pointed to my signature on several papers. This establishes a joint account. This grants limited power of attorney. This authorizes transfer of assets. My stomach clenched. How much has he taken? From what I can piece together, about 30% of your liquid assets. He's been careful, taking small amounts from multiple accounts to avoid triggering fraud alerts. I closed my eyes, fighting waves of nausea. Not just the money, though that was substantial, but the calculated betrayal behind it. I keep thinking about Robert, I whispered. How he would shred Richard's artwork if it wasn't museum quality. How he'd compare Richard's achievements to his own boyhood accomplishments. You can't blame yourself for Robert's parenting. Can't I? My voice cracked. I was there. I saw how it affected Richard, but I never stood up to Robert. I'd comfort Richard afterward, but never during. I was complicit. Gloria took my hands. Wanting to believe in the people we love isn't weakness, Margaret. A tear slipped down my cheek, the first I'd shed since this nightmare began. Then what is it? Humanity. She squeezed my fingers. But right now, we need strategy, not guilt. She was right. I wiped my eyes and straightened. What do we know about Vanessa? Gloria's expression darkened. When you mentioned her at our senior safety seminar last month, I thought the name sounded familiar. I checked with the coordinator. Vanessa Jordan was featured in their presentation on romance scams targeting seniors. Romance scams? I almost laughed. I'm 90, Gloria. Not for you, for Richard. She targets adult children of wealthy seniors, encourages them to defraud their parents. I recalled how Vanessa had excused herself during her visit, later finding her examining my silver cabinet. She was cataloging my valuables and taking photos. Gloria nodded grimly. I saw her when she thought no one was looking. The phone rang. Richard's number. Hello? Mom? His voice oozed concern. I've been thinking about your living situation. That house is too much for you to manage. I have Gloria. Gloria isn't getting any younger either. His tone turned persuasive. There's a wonderful retirement community I'd like you to consider. Luxury accommodations, full medical staff. You want me to sell the house? I kept my voice neutral despite my racing heart. It makes financial sense. We could invest the proceeds for your care. That's thoughtful, Richard. I forced warmth into my voice. Why don't you bring some brochures next time? After hanging up, I turned to Gloria. He's accelerating his timeline. Vincent must be pressuring him. Gloria looked worried. What should we do? I'd spent decades as a literature professor, analyzing characters' motivations, predicting their actions based on established patterns. Now, I needed to apply that analytical skill to my own son. First, we document everything, I said, my academic brain taking over. Then, we need legal counsel, someone specializing in elder fraud. Most importantly, we need to let Richard believe his plan is working. Gloria nodded slowly. You're going to set a trap. I'm going to give my son a lesson he should have learned long ago. I gathered the documents, my hands steady with newfound resolve. Actions have consequences. I woke to the sound of voices downstairs. The digital clock read 2:17 a.m. Gloria had left after dinner, and I'd been alone when I went to bed. Heart pounding, I reached for my phone, then stopped. Better to understand what was happening first. I slipped into my robe and inched toward the hallway. Keep your voice down, Richard's harsh whisper carried up the stairwell. She might hear you. I'm done waiting, replied a familiar voice. Vincent, you promised payment 3 weeks ago. I crept to the top of the stairs, keeping to the shadows. 3 men stood in my foyer. Richard, Vincent, and Vincent's silent associate. Richard's designer clothes couldn't hide his disheveled appearance. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements jittery. The paperwork takes time, Richard pleaded. There are safeguards for transferring property from elderly people. Vincent scoffed. Not if you have the right connections. My cousin Steve works at the county clerk's office. He can expedite things for a price. I've got her convinced to move to Sunshine Meadows. Once she signs those papers, The house is as good as sold. And the investment accounts? Richard ran a hand through his hair. Some are already liquidated. Others require additional signatures. Get them. Vincent stepped closer to Richard, who flinched. By Friday. She's seeing that specialist I told you about tomorrow. Once he declares her mentally unfit, I'll have complete control. Ice filled my veins. Mentally unfit? The floor creaked beneath my foot, and the men glanced up. I retreated into the shadows, but not before seeing the naked fear on Richard's face. After they left, I remained sitting on my bed, processing what I'd heard. Richard was bringing a specialist to declare me incompetent, the ultimate betrayal disguised as concern. A car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched Richard exit Vincent's car. Minutes later, my bedroom door cracked open as he peered in, checking if I was asleep. I controlled my breathing, feigning slumber. The door closed softly. I waited 10 minutes before confronting him in the kitchen. Who were those men, Richard? He startled, nearly dropping his glass. What men? The ones in our foyer at 2 in the morning. His expression shifted to concern. Mom, there was no one here. You must have been dreaming. I heard voices. I saw them. Richard set his glass down, his voice gentling. This isn't the first time you've imagined things. Remember last month when you thought the mailman was stealing your magazines? I had made no such claim. The deliberate gaslighting sent rage coursing through me. You're confused, Mom. It's why I've arranged for Dr. Phillips to visit tomorrow. He specializes in geriatric cognition. To declare me mentally unfit? The words escaped before I could stop them. Richard's eyes widened fractionally. Confirmation enough. He recovered quickly, placing a solicitous hand on my arm. To help you. I'm worried about these episodes. I pulled away. I'm perfectly lucid. Of course you are, he soothed, his tone suggesting exactly the opposite. Let's get you back to bed. Things clearer in the morning. As he guided me upstairs, his hand on my elbow felt like a shackle. In my room, he lingered by my medication. You forgot your evening pills. That might explain the confusion. I'll take them now, I lied. After he left, I waited. It was time to rewrite the narrative. State of Massachusetts versus Dawson Financial Group, Gloria read from her laptop screen. Daniel Feldman represented 6 elderly plaintiffs in a landmark case against financial advisors who targeted seniors. We sat in Daniel Feldman's waiting room, having driven 40 minutes to avoid any chance of being recognized. The attorney's office was modest, but impeccable. No flashy decor or pretentious artwork, just clean lines and comfortable furniture. Your nephew recommended him? I asked. Gloria nodded. Elder law, but has experience with fraud cases. The door opened, revealing a man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and alert eyes behind rimless glasses. Mrs. Wilson, Ms. Torres, I'm Daniel Feldman. His handshake was firm. Let's talk in my office. Inside, I placed the folder of documents on his desk. My son is trying to steal everything I own. For 2 hours, Feldman reviewed the papers, asking pointed questions about Richard's behavior, the missing valuables, and Vincent's threats. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes grew increasingly troubled. Mrs. Wilson, what you're describing is elder financial exploitation, a criminal offense in Massachusetts. He tapped the papers. These documents create a complex web. Some are legitimate banking forms, others have been subtly altered. The pattern suggests your son is systematically transferring your assets into accounts he controls. Can we stop him? Gloria asked. Yes, but it won't be simple. Feldman leaned forward. The most concerning thing is this application for cognitive assessment. It's the first step toward having you declared incompetent, which would give Richard complete control over your affairs. The room tilted momentarily. I gripped the armrests of my chair. What do we do? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. First, we document everything. Second, we secure your remaining assets. Third, his eyes met mine. We gather evidence that could potentially lead to criminal charges. Criminal charges, I repeated, against my son. That would be the district attorney's decision, but yes, what you've described goes beyond family disagreement into criminal territory. I walked out of Feldman's office in a daze. In the car, Gloria respected my silence, driving carefully through the autumn streets. At home, I locked myself in my bedroom, ignoring Richard's calls and Gloria's gentle knocks. For 3 days, I barely ate, barely slept. I stared at old photographs. Had my protection from Robert's harshness only taught him that manipulation works? On the fourth day, Gloria entered without knocking, setting down a tray with toast and tea. "Enough," she said firmly. "You can grieve, but you can't give up. He's my son, Gloria, and he's a grown man making terrible choices." She sat beside me. 10 years ago, I lost my life savings to a man I thought loved me. I was 62 and suddenly had nothing. This was the first I'd heard of Gloria's past. What happened? After the initial shock and shame, I got angry. Then I got smart. Her eyes held mine. I went back to school, became certified as a geriatric nurse, specialized in working with elderly patients who'd experienced trauma or financial abuse. She took my hand. "The best revenge is reclaiming your power. Richard sees you as a signature on a document, a confused old woman to be managed. Prove him wrong." Something stirred within me, not just anger, but determination. The academic who had commanded lecture halls, the woman who had navigated academia when female professors were rarities, awakened from her grief. "My son sees me as an obstacle," I said slowly. "A walking ATM. Well, perhaps it's time to show him who really taught whom in this family." Gloria smiled. "What's our next move?" I picked up my phone. "We call Feldman. If Richard wants to play games, let's play. But we'll play by my rules. Stroke symptoms include sudden confusion and trouble speaking," I explained to Richard, my words deliberately slurred. I experienced both yesterday. 3 weeks had passed since my meeting with Feldman. Richard sat across from me at the breakfast table, barely concealing his impatience. "All the more reason to move forward with Sunshine Meadows," he said. "They have medical staff on site." "Perhaps you're right." I rubbed my temple theatrically. "These episodes are frightening." Richard leaned forward, sensing victory. "I've prepared the transfer documents. Once signed, everything will be handled. The house sale, your move, investment of the proceeds." "You're so good to me," I murmured, watching satisfaction spread across his face. The doorbell rang. Richard tensed. "Expecting someone?" "Dr. Harrison, my old colleague from the university. We have lunch every Thursday." Richard frowned. "You didn't mention that, didn't I?" My memory isn't what it was. This careful performance, appearing increasingly confused around Richard while documenting my lucidity with trusted witnesses, was the cornerstone of Feldman's strategy. Dr. Harrison, my former department chair, now visited weekly, as did my longtime physician. Each visit was documented, creating a record directly contradicting any claim of mental incompetence. Meanwhile, Feldman had helped me freeze several accounts and begin the process of contesting the fraudulent transactions. The forensic accountant he'd recommended, Dr. Martinez, was meticulously tracking Richard's financial activities. "I should go." Richard gathered his papers, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "I'll bring the final paperwork tomorrow, Margaret. You had me convinced. A lifetime teaching Shakespearean tragedy has its uses." I straightened. "Did you bring the paperwork?" He handed me a sealed envelope containing his formal assessment of my cognitive functions, which he'd conducted over our last 3 meetings. This would be added to our growing arsenal of evidence. That afternoon, Gloria and I reviewed security footage from the discrete cameras installed throughout the common areas of the house. The system, recommended by Feldman, uploaded directly to secure cloud storage only Gloria and I could access. "There!" Gloria pointed at the screen where Richard and Vanessa were clearly visible rifling through my study while I napped upstairs. "They're searching for your financial documents." We watched as Richard found my checkbook and photographed it page by page. "Send this to Feldman," I said. Later, while reviewing bank statements, I noticed a pattern. These withdrawals all occurred on Tuesdays and Fridays, days Richard visited. Gloria compared dates, and all from branches near that pawn shop where he sold your silver. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Good news, Dr. Phillips can see you tomorrow. I'll pick you up at 10. Dr. Phillips, the specialist who would declare me incompetent. I showed Gloria the message. "What will you do?" "Agree to go." I smiled thinly. "But we'll make a stop first." The next morning, Richard arrived promptly at 10. I greeted him with vacant eyes and slightly disheveled appearance, the perfect picture of a confused elderly woman. "Ready for your appointment, Mom?" "Yes, dear. Just let me get my purse." In the car, I maintained my performance, asking the same questions repeatedly and staring vacantly out the window. Richard practically vibrated with anticipation. After we see Dr. Phillips, I'd like to stop at the bank, I said, my voice deliberately fragile. I need to update some information. Richard tensed. What information? Just some forms for my pension. I reached for his hand. Would you help me? The print is so small these days. Of course. His relieved smile didn't reach his eyes. As we drove, I thought of the microphone hidden in my brooch, recording every word. Whatever happened in Dr. Phillips' office, which Feldman suspected was a sham evaluation, would become evidence. Richard didn't realize that his carefully constructed fraud was already unraveling. The trap was set, and he was driving straight into it. Mrs. Wilson, please follow the light with your eyes, Dr. Phillips instructed, shining a penlight across my field of vision. His office, rented space in a medical building, felt hastily arranged, with generic diplomas on the walls and minimal equipment. I complied while noting details. His Harvard Medical School diploma displayed 1997 as the graduation year, yet he appeared barely 40. His desk held no personal items. His receptionist doubled as his nurse. Feldman would want all of these observations. Now, can you tell me today's date? Dr. Phillips asked, his pen poised over a clipboard. It's Tuesday, I said vaguely. October, I think. Richard sat in the corner. A concerned frown etched on his face. I'd seen that expression before, when he'd told Robert he'd used his college fund to start a business venture that mysteriously failed. And who is the current president? I blinked slowly. Is Reagan still in office? Dr. Phillips exchanged glances with Richard. Mrs. Wilson, can you count backward from 100 by sevens? I fumbled deliberately, watching Richard's shoulders relax with each mistake. After 30 minutes of similar tests, Dr. Phillips pulled Richard aside while I pretended to doze in my chair. Their hushed conversation carried clearly to my hidden microphone. Early stage dementia, consistent with Alzheimer's, Dr. Phillips murmured. Significant cognitive decline. How quickly will it progress? Richard asked, his voice tight with what might have sounded like concern to an outside observer. Hard to say. These cases can accelerate rapidly, especially after a trigger event, like moving from a long-time home. I'm already arranging that, Richard said. Will you sign the competency evaluation today? I'll prepare the paperwork. Should be ready by Friday. My fingers curled into fists in my lap. A complete sham, as Feldman had suspected. At the bank, I maintained my confused act as Richard guided me through the lobby to a private office. Mrs. Wilson, lovely to see you, the manager greeted me. This is my son, Richard, I said, my voice wavering perfectly. He's helping me today. Richard placed the last transfer documents before me. Mom just needs to sign these to consolidate her accounts. Of course, the manager smiled. Mrs. Wilson, could I get your signature on this form first? It's our standard verification. I signed the paper, which Richard barely glanced at. A critical mistake. It wasn't a verification form, but a request to freeze all transactions pending investigation of suspected fraud prepared in advance with Feldman. Something wrong? Richard asked, noticing the manager's extended absence after taking the form. Probably getting approval, I said vaguely. Banks have so many rules these days. When the manager returned, his demeanor had subtly shifted. I'll need to escalate these requests to our main branch. Regulations for transactions of this size. Richard's jaw tightened. How long will that take? Several business days, perhaps longer. Outside, Richard slammed his car door. Bureaucratic nonsense. Did something go wrong? I asked innocently. Just a delay. He gripped the steering wheel. Nothing to worry about. That evening, I recounted everything to Gloria while we reviewed the security footage from my brooch camera. Dr. Phillips never even tested your actual cognitive function, she said indignantly. He asked basic orientation questions any doctor would know aren't sufficient for diagnosis. Feldman suspected as much. I sipped my tea. The question is, how is he connected to Richard? Gloria's laptop chimed with an email notification. Speaking of Feldman, he sent something. The message contained a preliminary report from Dr. Martinez, the forensic accountant. Financial records showed Richard had already transferred over $200,000 from my accounts to pay gambling debts. More disturbing was evidence linking Dr. Phillips to Vincent through a series of shell companies associated with Sunshine Meadows retirement community. It's all connected, I whispered. The retirement home, Dr. Phillips, Vincent. They're working together to defraud seniors. And Richard is their puppet, Gloria added. My phone rang. Richard. Mom, change of plans. We need to finalize the paperwork tomorrow. Investors are interested in the property. Investors? I kept my voice neutral despite my racing heart. For the house. Great offer, but they need an answer quickly. The urgency in his voice told me everything. Vincent was increasing the pressure. Of course, dear. Whatever you think is best. After hanging up, I called Feldman immediately. Richard's accelerating his timeline. We need to move forward with our plan. Are you certain, Mrs. Wilson? Feldman asked. Once we take this step, there's no going back. I thought of the boy I'd cradled, the young man I'd bailed out of trouble, the son who now saw me as nothing but a resource to be drained. I'm certain. It's time Richard learned about consequences. I thought we'd do this properly, I told Richard the next morning, setting my teacup down with steady hands. Sign the final papers with my attorney present. His expression flickered between suspicion and relief. You have an attorney? Daniel Feldman. I consulted him about estate planning last year. The lie rolled off my tongue smoothly. He can meet us at 2. Richard hesitated, clearly calculating risks. Is that necessary? I want to make sure everything's in order for tax purposes. I smiled innocently. You know how the IRS can be. After a moment, he nodded. Fine. Whatever makes you comfortable. 2 o'clock found us in Feldman's office, a neutral setting that would prevent Richard from claiming coercion later. Feldman greeted us with professional courtesy, giving no indication he'd been working with me for weeks. Mrs. Wilson explained you're helping her reorganize her finances, he said to Richard. Very thoughtful. Richard shifted in his chair. Mom's getting older. The house is too much responsibility. Understandable. Feldman turned to me. And you're comfortable with these arrangements, Mrs. Wilson? I trust my son, I said, meeting Richard's eyes. He knows what's best. Feldman reviewed the documents while I maintained my performance as a slightly confused but cooperative mother. Richard grew increasingly impatient, checking his phone repeatedly. Problem? I asked. Just a work thing, he muttered. Feldman pointed to a paragraph on page 3. This clause transfers full ownership of the property rather than creating the living trust you mentioned, Mrs. Wilson. Richard intervened smoothly. We discussed changing approaches. A clean transfer simplifies things. I see. Feldman adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Wilson, could you explain your understanding of these documents? Before I could answer, Richard's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his face draining of color. Excuse me, he said, stepping into the hallway. Through the glass partition, I watched him argue with someone on the phone, his gestures becoming increasingly agitated. Even without hearing the words, I knew it was Vincent. He's under pressure, I told Feldman softly. We anticipated that. Feldman nodded to his assistant, who made a discreet call. Richard returned, his composure barely intact. We need to wrap this up. I have another appointment. Just a few more questions, Feldman said. Standard due diligence. Look, these are simple transfers, Richard snapped. Either sign them or not. His phone rang again. He answered with a harsh, what? Before stepping out once more. This time, his voice carried through the door. I'm getting it today. The papers are being signed right now. Yes, the house too. Everything. When he returned, his expression had hardened. Mom, we need to finish this now. Is everything all right? I asked. Fine. Just sign the documents. Feldman intervened. Perhaps we should reschedule when we're all less pressed for time. There's no time. Richard slammed his fist on the desk, mask finally slipping. Just sign the damn papers. Richard Wilson? A voice from the doorway made us all turn. 2 police officers stood there, accompanied by a man in a suit who showed his badge. Detective Clark, Financial Crimes Unit. We'd like to ask you some questions. Richard froze. About what? Allegations of elder financial exploitation and fraud. The detective's eyes moved to the documents. Are those the property transfer papers for Margaret Wilson's house? This is a family matter, Richard said, his voice strangled. My mother is confused. She needs assistance managing her affairs. That's not true. I straightened in my chair, dropping all pretense of confusion. I am perfectly competent. As attested by multiple medical professionals, my son has been systematically defrauding me. Richard stared at me, disbelief transforming into fury. You set me up. Before anyone could respond, commotion erupted in the reception area. Vincent and his associate had arrived, demanding to see Richard. I told you I'd have it today, Richard shouted as they burst into the office. Vincent grabbed Richard's collar. You've been saying that for weeks. The officers moved quickly, separating them. Sir, step back. He owes me $50,000, Vincent snarled. Gambling debt? Detective Clark asked. Investment opportunity, Vincent amended, suddenly aware of his audience. Detective Clark turned to Richard. Is that why you've been transferring your mother's assets? To pay gambling debts? Richard's face contorted. You don't understand. She owes me. After everything I put up with, all the years of never being good enough for her and my father, this is my inheritance. Inheritance is received after death. Mr. Wilson, Feldman said quietly, what you're describing is theft. As the officers separated the men for questioning, Richard's gaze locked with mine, hurt, angry, and beneath it all, the child who had never felt he measured up. Why? He whispered. Why would you do this to me? The question hung between us, heavy with decades of misunderstanding and pain. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long rectangles across the polished floor. The witness stand felt exposed, all eyes on me as I adjusted the microphone. Mrs. Wilson, could you describe when you first became aware of your son's activities? The district attorney's voice was respectful, but firm. 6 months had passed since that confrontation in Feldman's office. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but inexorably. Richard had been charged with multiple counts of elder financial exploitation and fraud. Vincent and his associate faced charges related to illegal gambling operations and extortion. Dr. Phillips was under investigation for his role in providing fraudulent medical evaluations. I noticed items missing from my home, I began, my voice steady. Silver pieces, jewelry. When I confronted Richard, he suggested I was confused, forgetting where I'd placed things. I detailed the escalating pattern. The documents presented when I was medicated or tired, the systematic isolation, the gaslighting. How did these actions affect you, Mrs. Wilson? The DA asked. I looked directly at Richard, seated beside his attorney. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a modest suit that hung loosely on his frame. 6 months of legal proceedings had aged him. I felt betrayed, I said simply, not just by the financial exploitation, but by the manipulation, the deliberate attempt to make me doubt my own mind. During cross-examination, Richard's attorney attempted to paint me as a controlling mother who had never approved of her son's choices. Isn't it true that you frequently bailed Richard out of financial difficulties, Mrs. Wilson? That you held your financial support over him as a form of control? I supported my son because I loved him, I replied. Perhaps too much. I now recognize that by constantly rescuing him, I enabled behaviors that ultimately led us here. When Richard took the stand, he was a study in contradictions, contrite one moment, defiant the next. My father built an empire, he testified, and reminded me daily that I would never measure up. My mother was the peaceful one, the mediator, but she never truly stood up to him. Not when it mattered. He described a childhood of impossible standards, where academic excellence was merely expected, and anything less was failure. The day I brought home my acceptance to State instead of Harvard, my father said, "At least you won't embarrass the Wilson name at a second-rate school." My mother said nothing. His words pierced me. He wasn't wrong. I had failed to protect him from Robert's cutting standards. But that truth existed alongside another, that Richard had made choices as an adult that couldn't be excused by childhood wounds. When did you first conceive of the plan to transfer your mother's assets to yourself? The DA asked. Richard's facade cracked. After Dad died, I was in deep with Vincent. I just needed some cash to get back on my feet. And when did some cash become a systematic plan to take everything? Richard stared at his hands. It evolved. With the help of Vanessa Jordan? His head snapped up. Vanessa understood me. She saw my potential. The same Vanessa Jordan who has now testified against you in exchange for immunity? The courtroom fell silent. Richard's expression hardened as the betrayal sank in. Yes, he finally said. That Vanessa. As the trial concluded, the jury was shown security footage, bank records, and the fraudulent medical evaluation. Dr. Martinez explained how Richard had systematically drained accounts and sold assets. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Richard showed no reaction. The judge scheduled sentencing for the following month and remanded him to custody. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and microphones. Mrs. Wilson, how do you feel about the verdict? One called out. Gloria protectively took my arm. No questions. But I paused, surveying the crowd. I feel vindicated, but not joyful. No mother celebrates her child's downfall, even when it's deserved. As we walked to the car, a reporter shouted one final question. "Do you forgive your son?" I turned back, aware of the cameras capturing my response. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process. Today, justice was served. Tomorrow, the healing begins. In the car, I finally allowed tears to fall, not for the money or the betrayal, but for the little boy who had once looked up at me with trusting eyes, and the mother who had failed to protect him from demands he could never satisfy. "You did what you had to do," Gloria said softly. "Yes," I replied, watching the courthouse recede in the side mirror. "But I wonder if I could have prevented it decades ago." The past couldn't be rewritten, but perhaps the future still held possibilities for redemption. Not just for Richard, but for me as well. Margaret Wilson. The prison visiting room buzzed with subdued conversations. 2 years had passed since the trial. I looked up to see Richard being led toward my table by a guard. "You came," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I said I would." I gestured to the chair across from me. At 60, Richard looked older than his years. Prison had stripped away his carefully maintained facade, revealing the vulnerability beneath. "How's the new apartment?" he asked after sitting down. "Smaller, manageable. I'd sold the Victorian house to cover legal fees and replace some of what Richard had taken. The balcony gets morning sun. I have breakfast there when the weather permits. Small talk, the refuge of those with too much unsaid between them. We'd had 6 such visits over the past 2 years, each slightly less strained than the last. Gloria still with you?" I nodded. "She's studying for her financial counselor certification. Turns out our experience inspired a career change." A ghost of a smile crossed Richard's face. "She always was smart. She was the first to see through you." His eyes met mine. "Not the first. You knew something was wrong from the beginning." "Yes." No point denying it. I just didn't want to believe it. Richard's hands fidgeted with the edge of the table. "I got your letter." I had written to him monthly, not detailed accounts of my life, but reflections, memories, questions. Most had gone unanswered until last week, when a handwritten envelope arrived bearing the prison's return address. "I meant what I wrote," he said. "I don't expect forgiveness, yet here I am." Why? The question hung between us, the same one he'd asked in Feldman's office 2 years ago, but with a different tone now. Not accusatory, but genuinely seeking understanding. "Because you're my son." I reached across the table, not quite touching him. "Because we both contributed to what happened, in different ways." He shook his head. "Don't make excuses for me." "I'm not. What you did was calculated, cruel, and entirely your choice." My voice remained steady. "But I've had 2 years to reflect on how we got here. Your father set impossible standards. I failed to protect you from them. That doesn't justify what you did, but it helps me understand it." Richard's eyes glistened. "I was so angry. All the time. I know. When Dad died, something snapped. All those years of never measuring up, of watching him succeed effortlessly while I struggled. I convinced myself I deserved what he left behind. And I was just an obstacle." He looked away. "By the time Vincent entered the picture, I was already planning to access your accounts. The gambling debts just accelerated everything." The brutal honesty surprised me. "I've joined a program here," he continued, "for gambling addiction, and another for anger management. It's not much, but it's something. It's a start." A bell rang, signaling the end of visiting hours. Richard stood reluctantly. "I have..." He hesitated. "I wouldn't expect to see you. Yet you might." Our eyes met again, mother and son, stripped of pretense, seeing each other clearly perhaps for the first time. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said softly. "I know it was last week. 92. I smiled. Who would have thought? Back in my apartment, I found Gloria and a small group of friends waiting with a belated birthday cake. Thomas, her nephew, had brought flowers. Dr. Harrison and his wife had prepared dinner. Feldman arrived late with a bottle of wine and apologies about court running long. "How was the visit?" Gloria asked privately as the others chatted. "Different," I said. "There was truth between us. It's a beginning. You never cease to amaze me." She squeezed my hand. Most people would have walked away. Walking away is sometimes easier. I watched my friends. This chosen family gathered in my new, smaller living room.